first session on women as urbanists, and I just want to say a couple of things about why we thought of doing a session on women as urbanists when we are talking about precarity. As I said earlier, precarity is something which is experienced by everyone, regardless of class, regardless of gender, along many different axes. But the experience of precarity, the burden of precariousness, falls unevenly. It doesn't fall on everyone in the same way, and not everyone negotiates and deals with it in the same way. And this understanding has very, very significant implications for the possibility of politics. Historically, the category of precariat was seen as incapable of being political. Right? The working class, the proletariat, is the organized group of people who are capable of politics. The men who work in factories, they are the ones who actually get organized as unions. They take on the capital. They are the ones who are going to bring about social transformation. Precariat was that class of people who were not part of the proletariat, who were drawn in occasionally, mostly left out. It would be the elderly, it would be the sick, it would be the physically challenged, it would be the children, all of those people who are not useful to capital in any meaningful way. It's a surplus population. That's what precariat was historically. But if we see now across the world, the class of people who are drawn into the process of work has expanded tremendously. And increasingly across the world, there are demands that everybody must get a decent social wage. Some kind of a wage that is dignified must be guaranteed to everyone, regardless of what work they do, right? But how does that actually happen? Who can make the demand? Is it okay for a group of academics to write papers about it and make that demand? Will it simply happen that way? Are we talking of doing something on behalf of people who are themselves incapable of politics? Who are we to do that? As we begin to think about that kind of questions, one of the things that strikes you is that maybe they are actually very, very political. Maybe they're doing things that we don't even know how to think about or talk about. Right? How does a woman, in the process of filling water at 2:30 in the morning, deploying different kinds of resources, commanding a child to do something, commanding someone else to do something, maybe there is something very, very significant and political happening in that space. Maybe that 19-year-old girl who works in a hospital as a paramedic, while preparing for some other examination, making contact, storing those numbers of all the patients that she finds friendly enough to her in her mobile phone, and thinks of those mobile phone numbers and contacts of some 200 people that she has met over the last year and a half as a resource. Maybe she's doing something very, very political. Maybe the people who are saying that, look, there is no guarantee that this job will last for the next 20 years, so I'm going to train myself to be actually able to jump from one branch to another, right? What do you do if you are perched on a branch very precariously? You train yourself to figure out how to hop from one thing to another. When your branch breaks down, you move. You have to develop that skill. Maybe that is where the actual politics is, and if we begin to recognize that and we rethink our categories, maybe we can actually make sense of politics in a very different way. Maybe we will learn how to take people who are in that space of precariousness much more seriously, and from there begin to learn what kinds of new politics can be organized. Right? So that's the idea, and with that in mind, we wanted to set up two different kinds of conversations. One is about, and we're using gender only as a way of starting this, one is about how does the experience of women in the city get categorized, organized, what kinds of work do they do? The second is, what kinds of knowledge about cities do women produce? And what we wanted to do was to bring that to the center stage as something that we need to even begin to think about and have conversations about.
Our first panel, Women as Urbanists, is in principle and practice a recognition of different experiences women bring to the table with their readings of the city. We have with us four formidable women. Ms. Tripta Chandola is a boxer and a researcher. As a postdoctoral fellow at IIHS, her focus has been on exploring the everyday negotiations on the margins. From boxing to football, our next panelist is Ms. Sabaa Khan, who works on minority rights with a focus on girls and women and is one of the founding members of Parcham. She has edited a book of Urdu poems called Beba Kalam on the theme of identity. With her, we have Ms. Hemlata, whose research focus is on the intersection of gender and violence. Our fourth panelist, Ms. Sonal Shah, is an architect planner by education. She guides the urban planning and gender strategy research and capacity building initiatives at the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, ITDP. I kindly request all of you to kindly come over.
So as I was saying before chai time, the reason why we wanted to put together a panel on women as urbanists is that urbanism, that is the study of how cities work, is something which has always been, in a very unseen, unstated manner, a very gendered masculine profession. If you look at research on cities over the last 100 years, it's always the men who talk about what cities are like, what they should be. If you look at the number of publications, if you look at the number of people who are writing about it, it's men. And that's a strange thing. Why is it that cities which actually seem to be functional, surviving, working, precisely because there is a whole lot of work that women do at homes and in workplaces and on the streets, what is it that they know about cities? What is it that they know about cities that needs to come into urban planning, urban policy and so on? How do we make it come out? Over the last 20 years or so, one or two streams of research in urbanization, urban studies and so on have taken on one particular route which is called everyday urbanism, which is that there are people who whose knowledge of the everyday practices in the city that we need to take seriously into account and see what that says about how infrastructures actually work. But that needs to be then further complicated with actually looking at the different kinds of identities, different kinds of places from which those knowledges come about. And that is what we wanted to try and figure out how to make a conversation around, and that's what this panel is about. And I'm glad that such a wonderful panel has come together. So I want to ask which one of you wants to go first and start the conversation. This is not an academic conversation, so we really don't have to worry about what we are saying. We need to think about what is it that we have not been able to say given the structures of power and say it now.
So I'd just like to talk about जो मेरा research में दिल्ली में एक झुग्गियों में I've been doing research for the last 13-14 years. और मैं जब वहाँ पे गई थी, when I started entering the space and when I started working over there, मैं तब I was very young, 23-24 साल की थी और सारा JNU में पढ़े हुए थे, वो सब था, तो लैंग्वेज मालूम था, वोकैबुलरी मालूम था, राइट्स का वो था, पर कभी झुग्गियों में गए नहीं थे. और क्यों जाएंगे, दैट इज़ ऑल्सो अ थिंग, क्यों जाएंगे हम. तो जब मैंने वहाँ जाना शुरू किया, और इसमें मतलब आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट दिस फ्रॉम अ पर्सनल सॉर्ट ऑफ experience, because that became a very significant trope for me about how knowledge is produced and what knowledge about the city through a gendered perspective from the margins, on the margins, has to be spoken about. तो उसमें जब मैं जाना शुरू किया वहाँ पे, ये मेरा भी, मैं आई एम पुटिंग माई सेल्फ ऑल्सो इन दिस लाइक ऑन द थिंग दैट जब मैंने भी जाना शुरू किया, मैं नहीं पहनती हूँ सूट, नहीं पहनती हूँ मैं, पर मैंने 2 फैब इंडिया के कुर्ते खरीदे, दुपट्टा पहनना शुरू किया, और मेरी हिंदी अंग्रेजी इज़ पंक्चुएटेड विद a lot of expletives which are very common to Delhi. बट मेरी हिंदी बड़ी चेस्ट हो गई, आप कैसे, और वो मैं बोल भी नहीं पाती हूँ। तो और मैं जाके मैं परफॉर्मेंस कर रही थी, और एंड देन और मैं जाके उनसे, जो मैं रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट में करने गई थी वहाँ पे, दैट वाज टू आस्क कि आप जाओ उनसे एंड व्हाट इज़ द रोल ऑफ ICTs इन पॉवर्टी एलिवेशन। तो वहाँ पे आप जाके पूछो उनसे कि अच्छा आप कितने गरीब हो, कैसे करते हो। एंड आई स्टार्टेड, मेरे को 2 टाइप का क्राइसिस हुआ इसमें, कि मैंने कहा कोई मेरे घर में आके पूछे बताओ इनकम लेवल बताओ, कहाँ कमा रहे हो, क्यों खर्च कर रहे हो, ये कर रहे हो। और दूसरा कि मतलब कोई वो गरीबी के अलावा कुछ और था ही नहीं नैरेटिव कुछ समझने का। और तीसरा एक मेरे को ज़्यादा फंडामेंटल क्राइसिस हुआ, मैंने कहा जब मैं इतना परफॉर्म कर रही हूँ, जब when I am performing, what gives me the right, what gives me the legitimacy to think कि मैं जाऊंगी तो वो मुझे सच बोलेंगे, मतलब मैं क्यों समझ रही हूँ। And then I sought a lot of what I think Anant was talking about earlier and right now. Then I took a break. मैंने कहा मैं पढ़ती हूँ, and I found like, और ये जो रिसर्चर वाला एंजाइटी था एज अ वुमन, कि वो जब जाते थे झुग्गियों में तो बोला जाता था तुम सेफ हो ना, तुम कैसे, मतलब आई यू ओके, एंड यू नो दैट होल सेंस ऑफ थिंग। तो मैंने कहा ये रिसर्चर वाला जो एंजाइटी है, मुझे डर भी लगता था, मुझे एंजाइटी भी होती थी, कहाँ पे, मतलब सो व्हेन आई वुड रीड एकेडमिक टेक्स्ट और स्पेशली रिटन बाय बोथ मेन एंड विमेन, तो वहाँ पे कोई रिसर्चर वाज लाइक मैं तो बिल्कुल कॉन्फिडेंट हूँ, उसको वो जो एंजाइटी कभी आई नहीं, कि वो नेगोशिएशन जो स्पेस का था वो कभी आया ही नहीं। तो उसके बाद मैंने अपना PhD शुरू कर दिया था, तो मैंने 6 महीने का ब्रेक लिया। उसके बाद जब व्हेन आई स्टार्टेड गोइंग टू द झुग्गीज, सो मैंने कहा कि मैं जैसी हूँ वैसी जाऊँगी। मैं अपने आप के बारे में अगर कोई मुझसे खुद नहीं बोलूँगी, पर अगर कोई मुझसे पूछता है आप सिगरेट पीते हो तो मैं हाँ बोलूँगी, आप दारू पीते हो हाँ बोलूँगी, मैं झूठ नहीं बोलूँगी। और मैं मतलब वो फैब इंडिया के कुर्ते अभी भी कहीं पड़े हुए होंगे, वो मैंने छोड़ दिया। बट एंड देन आई रियलाइज्ड दैट यू नो स्पेशली टॉकिंग अबाउट विमेन ऑन द मार्जिन्स, या तो होता है एक रोमांटिसाइजेशन ऑफ एन इंडिविजुअल केस, कि वो लड़की IAS बन गई झुग्गी से, या वो लड़की ने वो कर दिया, उसने वो कर दिया, और देयर इज दैट अदर एक्सट्रीम कि ये औरतें कलेक्टिव एक्शन में रेवोल्यूशन क्यों नहीं ला रही, मतलब क्यों नहीं ला रही हैं ये लोग यहाँ पे ये बैठ के, ये औरतें, व्हाई आरंट दे ब्रेकिंग द सोशल फैब्रिक। एंड बोथ ऑफ दीज सॉर्ट ऑफ कंस्ट्रक्शंस आर वेरी प्रॉब्लमैटिक फॉर मी, क्योंकि अगर वो जो लड़की IAS ऑफिसर बनी है उसको सेलिब्रेट करना बहुत ज़रूरी है, बट शी हैज़ बीन एबल टू डू इट, देयर इज अ होल सिस्टम, देयर इज अ होल फोर्स बिहाइंड इट। और क्यों यार ये औरतें गरीब हैं, काम कर रही हैं, बाहर भी काम कर रही हैं, बच्चों को भी संभाल रही हैं, अब उन पे हम रेवोल्यूशन का भी भार डाल दें, यू नो दैट। सो दैट बिकेम रियली सॉर्ट ऑफ थिंग, एंड देन आई जस्ट स्टार्टेड सॉर्ट ऑफ hanging around in, and that is informed in my practice, is to try to look for little transgressive spaces। और वो मेरा deliberation नहीं था, मैं I just started hanging around, मैंने कहा सुनाओ, हम सुनेंगे, हमको नहीं मालूम है। So and that started, and then and in all of these academics, especially in urban sort of on the margins, औरतों के बारे में यार, उनके बारे में ये बात होती नहीं है कि प्यार कहाँ होता है, आपको आपकी पॉलिटिक्स कैसे बनती है, ये नहीं कि आप वोट क्यों करते हो, किसको वोट करते हो, बट व्हाट इन्फॉर्म्स योर पॉलिटिक्स, व्हाट बिकम्स पॉलिटिक्स। जैसे आपने पानी भरने का वो एग्जाम्पल दिया, उसके अराउंड एक पूरा पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमी है जिससे विमेन अपने आप को नेगोशिएट करती हैं, स्पेस को कंट्रोल करती हैं, आदमियों को कंट्रोल करती हैं, अपनी सेक्सुअलिटी के थ्रू वो उसको कंट्रोल करती हैं। सो फॉर मी दीज लिटिल ट्रांसग्रेसिव एक्ट्स became really important. And what I think in terms of, I'll be very brief now, in terms of contributing to the knowledge production to talk about these little transgressive acts, whether it is this 14-year-old Muslim girl उसने generations के बाद अपने घर में convince किया कि भैया मैं jeans पहनूंगी, you know, those little sort of transgressive acts, और या कि 4 लड़कियां बैठ के हम पैसे बचा के मॉल जाएंगे, जैसे भी जाएंगे. So to think of them as ruptures and to think of and as urbanists or what knowledge producers or interventionists, if we can think about how these ruptures are supported by the different systems and to consolidate them towards making a, you know, making it easier to perform these transgressive acts would be something, is something I see as a contribution of my practice and research.
Sonal,
Thanks for
she's very
initiating
excited
the-
about jumping in right
Yeah,
there.
I know, because I think that when Anand spoke about women as urbanists, I feel one of the few things we've seen for some time is that, you know, woman is not a universal category as well, and therefore when we are situating ourselves as women, there are different identities that also need to be acknowledged by us. And so I think this is something that has been, in a sense, at the back of my head as well. My journey as an urban practitioner is perhaps also a journey where I will critique the way in which the built environment professions are taught. So, for example, when I got introduced to gender studies, I studied architecture. It happened through reading of John Berger's Ways of Seeing, where you were looking at representation of, you know, women, and you were looking at representation, I mean, of social roles. And I used that, and somehow, you know, I was 17, you know, Gujarati, upper middle class, Jain from Bombay, and that kind of began a thinking in myself, but largely where I began to question a lot of, question my family, you know, how our family was organized. But for a very long time, it really didn't reflect in the way that I would practice as an urbanist, to be honest. I mean, and I don't recollect, for example, any courses on gender and space. I'm still not sure how many schools of architecture, urban planning and urban design teach these. I have made this a conscious attempt now because I work in transportation and urban planning. And so I would actually say that I have taught myself, right? And how did this trigger happen? So even in graduate studies, I took a lot of courses in, you know, in feminism, in gender studies. Again, the same challenge is, how does the city read? And I was reading Western authors. I was reading Dolores Hayden, for example, and the rest. When we were in undergraduate studies in Dharavi, we were actually studying the settlement, but somehow neither in me or my faculty, we were not looking at it through a gender perspective at all. And so I think that this is a very, very serious critique of the way in which the built environment professions are taught. So what really kind of, you know, flipped this was also, I'm sure we all know about Jyoti Singh's rape and death, you know, in December of 2012. And at the time I was working with a non-profit, like I said, that focused on transportation and urban planning. And at some point we said, you know, we need to do something about this, right? And well, it actually happened like this. And since then I think I've just been, we had a number of opportunities. At the time, Mumbai was also going through preparing its development plan, and Akshara, you know, which is a very well-renowned women's group, was kind of had come up with many organizations saying, where is gender in your development plan? You know, you don't have a single statistic, you know, not even a single number apart from, you know, the number of men and women in your city, you know, that's all you have. And so they began a series of consultations on saying, is that how would you build gender into the development plan? And so I think we just took this opportunity. I pretty much taught myself on understanding the relationships between gender and transport, and realizing that in this ecosystem, who are all the players, if you will, you know, if I can just, because we work a lot with government, right? And so there is, and while we are working with governments, we have women's groups on one hand, and we have government as well. There seemed to be that there was like this big gap, right? Like this big kind of, it seemed like people were living in very, very different worlds. The idea, I think Anant mentioned the idea of everyday urbanism. You know, over the last 10 or more years, many women's groups in the have been talking about safer cities, right? I think be it Jagori, Akshara, so they've been talking about how violent our public spaces are and what we should do. Unfortunately, we have not seen too much happen on the ground in terms of creating safer streets and safer public spaces. This is a big problem, and this is where I decided to situate my practice, that for me it was important to see that the research that I do enables some kind of change in the way that our physical spaces are created, particularly transport. I'm happy to talk more, but
Yeah, let's just
later.
go
Let's just
around
do
the
it,
table.
Okay.
Okay, so this is like a surprise panel, meaning I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be talking about. And I think that definitions, I think what Anant mentioned in the morning are important, because how do you understand precarity? I think for me to start with, even me as an urbanist was like a shock, okay, like am I? And so then I began to reflect on the kind of work I do and how does it fit into this sense of urbanism or an urbanist, etc. So meaning I work with Parcham, which and I also work with TISS, and so I do this kind of work which is development plan related, and it's also working with Muslim women in a very precarious community, a community which has come into being following the riots in Bombay in 90 to 93. So the sense of loss has what is predominant, and that kind of informs your everyday interaction and your engagement with the city as well. So so I think, meaning precariousness, what it means as a woman, am I just a woman, but I'm also Muslim, and then if you know, if I'm a poor Muslim woman, what meaning how do various different identities then play themselves together but are also independent of each other. So I might be perceived as just a woman in some space if I'm not, meaning in this kind of attire, right? But in other places it's my Muslimness which comes to the fore, and how does that put me in a position of vulnerability are things that need to be understood and probably also inform practice when we are doing it. So so as Parcham, meaning I think that we've tried very hard to reclaim public space as women, and while doing that, we are also realizing that men see public spaces very differently from how women see that, and I think that many people are now talking about it, but when in spite of talking about it, it's still not becoming any easier for us to access them, right? So we know, but then what are we doing to change that? And I think that needs to inform the everyday urbanism and also the policies that we are working towards in trying to change this built environment and also cities to make it more accessible for girls. Why shouldn't I just have the right to play, or you know, just sit at a corner without being stared at, or you know, those kind of spaces are required. And if I wear a hijab and I occupy that public space, or if I'm just, you know, wearing a topi and just sitting doing nothing, what is the kind of, you know, meaning what goes on in another person's mind, and how does that affect how I occupy that public space? I think those are also important issues. The other, I think that being in Bombay and having seen the ghettos, and I'm sure that now almost every city in India is becoming more and more ghettoized, and because a lot of my work is concentrated in Mumra, which has become a ghetto of like 80% Muslim population of an 8 lakh population that lives there, right? And it's all come because of the riots, earlier Bhiwandi and then Bombay. So when we were working on the Bombay development plan, we were also looking at all these various ghettos and trying to figure out how a development plan can inform or, you know, help a more equitable city, a city where you don't have to get, you know, boxed into, you know, these Muslim areas, Hindu areas, Parsi areas. But we were stuck because really there is no policy that can dictate that, okay, you know, this has to be a mixed community, a mixed settlement. So I think that is one huge challenge that as urbanists and as planners that one needs to think through and talk about. So yeah, we play football, and we also try to look at cities. We try to study development plans and figure how we can find place for ourselves. So in Mumra, we actually did this study of the development plan. We figured that there's a ground that we girls can access, because the rest of them were completely taken over by men and boys, and they refused to let us play. So we finally managed to get a reservation of a sports ground for girls, and we are very happy about that. So I think that, meaning, like you said, both things are very important. I think that collective strength is important, and that collective strength, when it accomplishes something, is also very important to talk about and to claim as a victory, so that it helps more collectivization.
So after a lot of focus on, I think, how we really visualize and we negotiate around the space as a physical concept. So I would like to, dwell and try to integrate this more from the point of view of how I work with, like women, with adolescent boys and girls, as part of various research projects that I do with where I work right now, International Center for Research on Women. And so my work is situated in partly in suburban areas, some peripheries of the urban areas of Ranchi city in Jharkhand, and upcoming small towns like Dholpur in Rajasthan, and also rural areas. So I think my work, what I'll speak, will have a lot of reflections around people who are looking at urban areas also from the view of aspirations of migrating, what kind of life they see, and of people who have already migrated there, what they are seeing, how they are negotiating. And in fact, like, my journey is also almost same, like having migrated from a hill state, from a town which the concept of safety is more about whether you feel the warmth around the people whom you are with. It's more to do with that, how you relate to people, more than, I think, the safety of the place. So actually, of the physical spaces. So that is kind of transition that every time I meet young girls who come to work in urban areas or have aspirations to go there. So my question is that what does the city hold for you? Do you know that? What are the dreams that you look forward to? So these are the questions, and of course, the answers are almost same. What they would in fact tell me, like, I would want to do what you do. So what do all of us do in the cities? I would first start with what I cannot do. Is as an individual who would want to move around in the city, or even wander around on certain days. I drive, I speak English, I look educated, I wear specs. So I go around with that power, right? I wear a watch, I have a mobile, a lot of things which give me that negotiating power. But in terms of various, people of various sexualities, and people at various levels, the classes that we can talk of. For example, while doing a research with concept of safety, what makes a woman feel safe in the Badarpur area in habitation, which is a slum in Delhi, is the narratives of women who tell me, for me, when I walk out of the house, having a mobile in my hand sometimes make me feel more safe than having even money in my pocket, because I may call up someone, I may actually take a Uber, I may do whatever. But what is it that is making several women feel safe? Is actually taking relief or taking shelter within the heteronormative, like patriarchal structures. Like many of us would not even imagine that a bindi worn by a woman who's long lost her husband, just to stay in that locality, continue to be there, makes her feel safe. Or just sporting a Mangal Sutra to go around working in different houses makes certain women feel safe. So the idea is about the mindsets that we all are dealing with. I am negotiating with mindsets to actually get a livelihood. And what are those mindsets? I say that streets are unsafe because there are young boys lurking around, they do nothing. But again, the patriarchal structures that the women are negotiating with, the men and young boys are also negotiating with the same. There are pressures of masculinity there. They too deal with their own set of precariousness. Is that one room houses of 12 by 14 feet or 12 by 10. The streets anyways are seen as unsafe for girls. So the priority is लड़की लोग तुम अंदर रहो, स्कूल जाओ, सीधे स्कूल से घर वापस आओ और अपना काम करो, घर में रहो. But where are the boys supposed to be? The boys are hanging out on the streets. Do we have spaces to really engage young, boys or young girls in open spaces? Are we making spaces in urban planning or even in schools, like where girls and boys freely interact with each other to understand each other as human beings who have to coexist? And this is such an irony that after alienating right from the stage of adolescence till long, at least till when they get married, you want them at least to live, them to live in harmony. Which harmony? And like the kind of violence that we see on the streets, the kind of violence that girls or women face in the homes, or even men and women together face at workplaces, is actually a outcome of collective, the kind of mindsets that we all have, been part of. So I feel urban planning should also take into account certain initiatives on or evidences on what does it take to really challenge the social norms which keep such gender inequitable attitudes and mindsets in place. So maybe we can talk about this later more.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to make a couple of comments and then invite another person onto the panel. The quick comments I wanted to make is that, one, what Hemlata just said is a very interesting question of, can planning ever really be insurgent, right? Is it possible for planning to bring about changes in a structure of power where planning doesn't seem to be delivering justice? Right? It's an important question that we all need to reflect on. I wanted to very quickly narrate 3 specific instances in which, among dozens of instances when we encountered gender as a question, sexuality as a question in our own work. First one was when we made a map of all the bus routes in Hyderabad. When we made the map of all the bus routes in Hyderabad, with the central part of the city looking very densely populated by buses, it looked like a fantastic city where everybody is able to get where they want to get to. And we showed this to a group of women. They looked at it and said, "You're wrong, this city is terrible, this map is not telling us that it's a great city." So I said, "Why? What do you mean?" And they gave us several examples, right? One is that, think about all the women who live in women's hostels, have to go to classes at 6 o'clock in the evening and they don't have buses. If they get a bus, then they will have to walk at least 2 kilometers to get to the hostel. So the cost of moving around in this city is very, very high for certain groups of people. The second thing that they pointed out is that think about the thousands of women, young women, who are working in shopping malls or in hospitals and their working hours. To be able to afford the kind of housing at all in the city with the kind of incomes that they get, they have to live in places which are really remote, which are not connected by buses, and that means that they have no way of actually moving around unless somebody figures out some solution for that. Which meant then that the city is actually very, very badly serviced in terms of public transportation, even though the map that we first produced looks like a great, well-serviced city. And that's when we realized that maps actually have gender, right? We produced a male map. We did not produce a map that is actually sensitive to gender questions, right? The second thing that happened was we started running a football club. And the easiest thing was to actually run a football club for boys. And a number of girls who lived in apartments close to the football ground kept watching those boys, and they started putting pressure on their parents saying that हमको उनके ऑफिस में ले चलो कि यहाँ पे कोई कुछ कर रहे हैं. Then the parents came to us and they said that कि our girls are saying that they want to play football, do something, and we can't find a playground. We just could not find a playground where the girls could be given the space. Now, getting the girls out onto the street is a very complicated thing because you have to first start with her nani. Her nani is the one who is the most worried, right? Because she is thinking about how is the girl going to get married once she turns 14, 15, 16, and you have to start the negotiation from there, and you don't know how from there you're going to finally come out onto the street when you actually don't have a playground. So in the beginning, we started having meetings with those girls. We started thinking about what can be done. At some point of time, we started feeling embarrassed because we're going around talking to people, trying to figure out where we can get the grounds, requesting people. Nothing is working. So do you go to the families and say that, look, send out the girls as if they are boys? Or do you go to somebody and say that, look, they're girls, they need special protection, give us the ground? You don't quite know how to do this, right? It becomes very, very complicated. And this is a question of how the city actually works. And as we kept working through these kinds of questions, we realized that gender, sexuality are things which have to be thought through at every step. And there are no guarantees, there are no clear answers. You might be coming up with answers that could be completely wrong in some register, but be very right in another register, which is why I was saying in the morning that one of the reasons why this is also exciting and so scary at the same time is that you could be completely screwing up something and you could be doing something really great, and that's what the opportunities are really about. I want to stop there and ask Amita Bhide, who actually got delayed because of the pilot going missing, as I hear. Amita, just to very quickly tell you what. No, this is just a reminder that I must translate what some of the things that I have said into Telugu. I will do that, but let Amita speak first, and then I will do that. Please, Amita.
So I'm not clued into all the conversations at all. I think I came towards the end of what Sabha was talking and then listened into you. So it may be on a completely different plane altogether. But let me start at a point where I think Anant talked about the two very different registers and the uncertainty about those registers. And this is really on a personal note, really thinking about it. I come from Mumbai, and I stayed in a part of Mumbai which was like one end of the western suburbs, and I worked in a part of Mumbai which is completely a northeastern edge of Mumbai, and so had quite long commutes, in fact. So 2.5 hours one way was the length of my commute, and travelled so for 14 years. And in these 14 years, one of the things which constantly kept on troubling me, here I am, trained in social work, working in a school of social sciences, trying to work at multiple levels thinking about gender, and converted into a woman here who is trying to encounter a city which does not have any relationship between your workplace and where your home is. It's completely wonky, and so my life is something where, I mean, I started feeling that my life, the only thing I could claim for myself is I'm a great commuter, right? So that's all the performance perhaps, right? And Mumbai does offer that kind of a extreme difficult kind of situation where you have workplaces which are concentrated, a division, extreme division between where are workplaces located, mostly in the south of the city, and residences which are perhaps suburbs and elsewhere, and therefore commuting perhaps becomes an essential part of almost every Mumbaikar's life. But for women it becomes especially difficult because there are no neighborhood services at all, and which results in some very wonky indicators, like you have a city where the work participation rate is around 16%. Okay? Now you talk of world class city, I have never ever heard a world class city talking about a parameter which gives women the opportunities to work and participate in work life almost equally as men, right? And how women therefore get confined to home based work, how women get confined to taking big career breaks, and so on and so forth. So this is really on a personal note. From this micro experience, I want to connect to another issue that I have been dealing with in the past several years, and it is thinking about politics and women. And in the arena of politics, I think it's very interesting, just if you look at post the 73rd and the 74th amendments, which were passed in 1992 and 1993 respectively, there has been a lot of talk about reservation for women in local governments, and there have been a whole lot of studies especially done in women in rural local governments, in Panchayati Raj. It's also been something which has been hailed now over the last 20 years of its existence as a fairly successful experiment, where women have been able to break, I would say, several glass ceilings in some ways, and the presence of women in Panchayati institutions is something which is now fairly well accepted. Okay? We don't see such a scenario in urban areas at all. In fact, at 2-3 levels, and I think these are illustrations because the Sarpanch Pati in rural areas got much celebrated. Okay? But around the woman representative, the elected woman representative in the municipalities and the municipal corporations, again there exist several of these kind of agents. It may be a Nagar Sevak husband, or it may be a Nagar Sevak Pita, or it may be a Nagar Sevak Bhau or Bhai. Okay, so there are several male people around you, and not just that. So that was not just prevalent in the first generation when 1993, which was the first launch of these kind of reforms, but many of these things perpetuated to date. Okay, so this is an illustration which is perhaps a little known. The second thing that I would like to talk about is the way in which the entire pattern of politics actually happens in order to appropriate some of these aspects which are linked to women. And so we are doing this, I think, interesting research where we are trying to map what happens in political parties, what happens in bureaucracies, and then what happens in terms of the actual political performativity and the arenas like the general body meetings or the standing committees and the special committees. So almost as a rule, it is women, if they get any representation in committees, they are perennially relegated to the Women and Child Development Committee. If you further look at the Women and Child Development Committee, the 74th Amendment actually mandates that there should be a 5% fund of the general fund of the municipality, which has to go towards this women and child development committees. Now, very interestingly, in most municipal committees in Maharashtra, one sees that this 5% fund is hardly ever given to municipal corporations. Even when it is given, the women and child development committees are not able to spend that money, and which really talks about the fact, is it that there is a lack of a women and child agenda in the corporations? Are our municipal councils, are the members of the WCD unable to think of what can be done for women? And are civil society organizations, even women's organizations in particular localities, unable to work with this political fund and opportunity which is available and to advance a gendered agenda? It really, to me, is like a collective speak about what happens and what is their agenda. In fact, in terms of even accounting for what is the goal which has been set, the women and child development committees hardly ever have a goal which is set. So this is about committee functioning. I'll not get into other committees just now because I think it's too far a thing. Let me get into the political parties. I think there is hardly any research per se in terms of how a political party is a highly gendered organization. That most decisions today, I think, even greater control on, and so a huge difference between rural local politics and urban local politics is the fact of political parties are an accepted actor and an entrenched actor in urban local governments, and the kind of control that they have over the women's agency is huge. Okay, so what kind of decisions that you participate in, what do you say yes to, how you are mobilized in the house, sometimes as protesters, sometimes are as generally creating nuisance of yourself, or sometimes in saying yes to certain decisions which may even be anti-women decisions. And yet there are several interesting instances that we find where women councillors across political parties are also able to unite and to take forward certain demands. Like one very inspiring instance for me was in Ambernath Municipal Council, which is a very small municipal council, and where huge violence around political behavior is something which is kind of ingrained there. But there, all the women across different parties came together and tried to resist the privatization of a single municipal hospital which existed in that council. Something which is really great to see how they worked with their own political party bosses, the state chiefs, and so on and so forth. This is so also about the resources which are given to women during elections. Okay, so reservations, the way they are deployed again in Maharashtra is very. So I'll just talk about this third aspect and then stop here. At the first instance, the reservation seems to be a huge opportunity, right? It is making and giving an opportunity for women to enter. In fact, in Maharashtra, and then this was followed, I think, by several other state governments as well, the reservation in urban local governments was extended to 50%. So from 33%, it's 50% now, and which is even more decisive. But what is not recognized is, along with this, the state government also takes parallel decisions which will enable the co-option of this kind of gendered municipal council. Just two illustrations here. One is a practice that is called as a multi-member ward system. And in a multi-member ward system, what is done is that the municipal councils, the electoral wards within the municipal council are grouped together, and people have to vote as a panel of candidates. Okay? So what this has done is that both the male candidates and the female candidates, so out of 4 candidates in a panel, 2 have to be male, 2 have to be female, and people have to, so all the 4 wards grouped together have to vote for this panel, entire panel person. Now what this does is basically that it has enabled a huge entrenchment of family politics. So very famously in the Thane Municipal Corporation, there are these 7 big families where there is an entire family panel. So there is a father-in-law, there is a daughter-in-law, and then there are the son and someone else, right? So that forms the panel together, and such 7 big families have kind of brought in their hold. So this is something which is parallelly followed. Obviously the interest behind this is that they don't want the established male candidate to be disturbed by this. The second very interesting instance is, how do you do the reservation? Okay, so in Maharashtra again, they draw the lots for reservation for every election, just before every election. And what this means is that women candidates, women political aspirants are never able to consolidate their constituencies at all. Okay, so it also places, so just as we talk about women's reservation, it also automatically also places like a glass ceiling on how much you can go further, and it makes the path of a political career very, very difficult. So I just wanted to place these 2 thoughts before you. The same step, perhaps, which seems something which is very progressive, but on the other hand, the way it is shaped and something which is often missed from a larger public discourse is the way in which constraints are also placed along that path. And similarly, for that transport thing that I began with, just to complete that circle, while it makes the city, these kind of designs of the city where work and residence are separated, just as they make life difficult for a woman, on the other hand, they also place huge opportunities. And one of the things that I have experienced again as a woman is the huge potential for mobilization, where thousands of us women travel by a thing called a train, by a bus, a ladies special, which was so precious to me as a commuter, and which I remember has afforded huge opportunities to mobilize on issues. Like one of the things when I was commuting was there was this huge scandal in a town called Jalgaon, where women were duped and they were filmed. There were pornographic films of women, and it was a huge scandal really in Jalgaon. But there was no gendered voice. Okay? It was seen largely as a political scandal, with people and political parties heaping all kinds of things upon each other, but without the dignity of these women who were involved, which was being respected. And the ladies special became the agency for mobilizing a voice for these women. So it's something which automatically also offered some kind of a opportunity for a larger sisterhood, if one can say. So I'll stop here.
What's the time now? 12:30. So we have another half an hour. ముందు కదిలే ముందు తెలుగులో అనువాదం కావాలి అనుకుంటున్న వాళ్ళు ఎవరన్నా ఉంటే ఒక్కసారి చేతులు ఎత్తారా? అవసరం లేకపోతే చేయండి నేను. రైట్? అవసరం లేదు. Perfect. Okay. So there's no need for a translation into Telugu. Does anyone need translation into Hindi? That's a bad question. हिंदी में अनुवाद चाहिए क्या किसी के लिए? नहीं. Okay. So then we can actually have another half an hour, and I'm really hoping that this conversation will bring out a lot more interesting things. I'm hearing 3 or 4 different threads in this, right? One is the thread of the subjective personal experience of the person who is asking questions. As a researcher, as an activist, etc., how do I navigate the world around me? That is one set of issues. And I think that one of the key insights that is emerging is that there are a number of uncertainties in that. There are a number of things that we don't quite know the answers for, but we go ahead and push and try and find where those things are going. Second thing that is emerging is that there are a whole sets of pedagogic practices, knowledge, disciplines, which do not tell us that the world is differentiated, that there are women, that the experience of different identities is very, very different, is something that you are not even taught, right? And if we're not taught, if our new architects, if our new generation of planners are not taught, then we're actually losing out a lot of time, because it does take a lot of time for each individual to learn it on their own. And if we are learning this as individuals, then how does it actually become something that is generalized as a social consciousness? Right? What kinds of strategies do we need to consolidate these knowledges, even if they are tentative, even if they are uncertain, even if they are local, very specific to particular places? How do we bring them together as things that can be socialized? That's another set of questions. I think one very important issue that is emerging is that whether we look at it as a personal option, or we look at it as options that are taken by large numbers of people, mobility, the ability to move through places, and the flip side of it, the ability to occupy place, right? Whether it is a public space or a train coach, occupying it physically is a very important part of how place is actually made, because it's those train coaches, it's those street side dabbas, it is the playgrounds, it is the Chabutra in Hyderabad. And I just wanted to quickly narrate a very interesting thing that's going on here in Hyderabad right now. For the last 3 or 4 years, we have something called Operation Chabutra in Hyderabad. Operation Chabutra is this very peculiar shift that has happened. See, in Hyderabad, public space is highly gendered. Men, because you don't have enough space in the house, they spill over onto the streets, they sit on the street and keep talking till 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the night. That's the place where they learn, that's the place where they exchange information and so on. Now that is being seen increasingly as a threat to public order. So Operation Chabutra is the operation of picking up young men who are on the street after a certain hour. The police pick them up, take them. The mosque sometimes is involved, and the police definitely are involved, and they do something called counseling. and that counseling is a very important part of Operation Chabutra, with the threat that you will enter our records. जी, तो उसके बाद में they sometimes call their parents and shame them कि आप अपने बच्चों को ऐसे कैसे छोड़ दे रहे हैं सड़क के ऊपर, right? So it's a very big thing, right? And it changes the urban culture. We have those kinds of issues. So given all of these, I just want to open up another round of opportunity for all 5 of you to speak. One, what kinds of things can we actually think about as viable, legible, necessary agendas that we can work with, both in terms of pedagogy and in terms of practice. Okay? Yeah. Please.
ये अपना विषय नहीं है, लेकिन एक चीज़ मुझे लगता है जो अनिता जी कह रहे थे उसमें मैं जोड़ना चाह रहा था, और वो इसलिए महत्वपूर्ण है क्योंकि अगर हम जिस विषय पे बात कर रहे हैं कि अनिश्चितताओं के शहर में ज़िंदगी की अनिश्चितताएं जो हैं उसको किस तरह से देखें, इसमें जो पॉलिटिक्स वाला हिस्सा है और पार्टिसिपेशन का, और दोनों एक दूसरे से बहुत मजबूती से जुड़े हुए हैं, दोनों एक दूसरे के बिना आएंगे नहीं, और वहीं से प्लानिंग का रास्ता निकलता है, क्योंकि जब तक पार्टिसिपेशन और पॉलिटिक्स नहीं आपके हाथ में है तब तक प्लानिंग में आपका दखल नहीं होगा। सरकारें तो किसी के लिए प्लान नहीं कर रही। दिल्ली में अगर JNU से मैं दिलशाद गार्डन जाने के बारे में सोचता था सुंदर नगरी में, तो 3 घंटे बस से लगते थे। तो वो दुश्वारियां शहर की हैं। शहर में जो प्लानिंग हो भी रही हैं तो वो किसी कॉमनवेल्थ गेम के लिए हुई हैं। दंतेवाड़ा में जो रोड बनी है वो लोगों के लिए नहीं बनी है, महिला और पुरुष का सवाल बाद में आएगा, वो ट्रकों के लिए बनी है, संसाधनों की लूट के लिए बनी। तो प्लानिंग हो ही किसी और के लिए रही है। उसमें जब लोगों के लिए प्लानिंग आएगी तब महिलाओं की प्लानिंग का भी सवाल उठेगा। जब लोगों के लिए प्लानिंग की ही बात नहीं है तो वो कहाँ से आए, पहली तो चिंता ये है। दूसरा जो पॉलिटिक्स वाले में मैं वहीं से, क्योंकि आपने वो बात रख दी है, एक चीज़ मैं बस जोड़ना चाह रहा हूँ कि विचारधारा का जो संकट है उसको भी आप देखें कि मनमोहन सिंह स्कूल ऑफ थॉट के समय में तो आप एक तरह से देखते हैं कि कैपिटलिज्म आ गया, न्यू लिबरल पॉलिसीज, वो सब आप देख रहे हैं कि मार्केट कहाँ पहुँचा दिया उसने, और उसका प्रतिफल ये है कि दिल्ली से और नोएडा से अच्छी सड़कें जो है वो छत्तीसगढ़ में और झारखंड में जहाँ संसाधन है वहाँ पे बन रहे हैं। लेकिन दूसरे किस्म का एक और भी बड़ा संकट है, और जो इतना खतरनाक है कि आपकी कितनी भी अच्छी प्लानिंग हो वो कैसे एकदम से शहरों को पैरालाइज कर देता है। जब आपको कोई एक विचारधारा या कोई एक पॉलिटिकल पार्टी का स्रोत जहाँ से उसकी चीज़ें निकल रही हैं वो कहे कि महिलाओं को 5 बच्चे पैदा करने चाहिए, जब आपको बताया जाए कि आप ये कपड़े नहीं पहन सकती हैं, जब किसी एक महिला के सो कॉल्ड रक्षा के लिए राजसमंद में एक आदमी दूसरे आदमी को जला दे, मारे और जला दे और उसका वीडियो पब्लिक करे, इन खतरों को भी देखिए कि पॉलिटिक्स क्यों बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है। कि आप बहुत अच्छा प्लान भी बनाएंगे लेकिन एक तरह की राजनीति, एक तरह की विचारधारा कैसे आपके पूरे प्लान को पैरालाइज कर देगी, कैसे शहर में एक अघोषित कर्फ्यू महिलाओं के लिए होगा, चाहे वो बस पे चलने का मसला हो, रात में बाहर निकलने का मसला हो, वर्क प्लेस पे अपनी चीज़ों को क्लेम करने का मसला हो। तो ये जो एक मसला है पॉलिटिक्स का और आइडियोलॉजीज को समझने का कि खतरे कितने गहरे हैं, और इनसे भी लड़ने के बारे में अगर नहीं सोचेंगे और इनसे कैसे लड़ना चाहिए ये आप लोग बेहतर बता पाएंगे। मुझे लगा कि ये सवाल मैं हस्तक्षेप के तौर पर रख दूँ।
At this point, in view of time, yeah, so we have time for 2 or 3 very quick comments, questions. That Meera.
I'm just thinking of the woman's body, toilets, sanitary pads, places to feed the baby. I was very shocked and surprised to find the Mangalore Passport Office has a baby feeding counter, because 95% of the people who come there are women whose husbands are in Dubai. So the whole place is filled with babies. I had never seen so many babies in a passport office ever. So there were at least, like when I went, I think there were about, out of 200 people, I think about 150 were babies. So they have 2 baby feeding counters actually, like they have 2 cabins. So women's planning for women's bodies, you know, every time I'm walking on the road, I'm like, barista doesn't allow women to use the toilet, Coffee Day does. You can just walk in, you know, pretend you're a customer, use the toilet and come out. So my negotiations to travel, as I've got older, it's become more important, like where are the toilets on this road? In the urban area. In the rural, I don't mind, I use the fees. But here it's the question of that. So I think somewhere women and their bodies are completely, my office chair doesn't fit me anymore, my head's grown larger. My sari gets rolled under that little wheel. I'm sure everyone's sari gets caught in that wheel. The office furniture is not designed for me. So it's like this everyday precarity of being a woman's body. It's like sometimes I want to cut my boobs and throw away because I can't even do Surya Namaskar properly now. So it's like nothing is built for my body, and I'm constantly in the more I get injured, I am negotiating the body. So I would like somebody to talk about the woman's body, because that's what makes us somewhat different and difficult to manage. Just place as a space.
So I had a question in terms of built environment, and what I wanted to ask was, how do you think built environment can work towards equality, in the sense that when we have open cultural spaces and progressive schools like this one, where you sort of structure things in a way where equality is encouraged, people are encouraged to think in terms of that, how do you think urban planning and built environments can sort of be shaped to work towards that, shaped in a way where it encourages people to behave in a certain way that is more civic that is more equal. So yeah.
Any more questions?
I heard all of you with a lot of interest, and I've come here to get myself educated on precarity, especially. But I was a bit worried. I was a bit worried because none of you related your experience of women, the question of gender, to larger politics, as he mentioned. As if you have left, as intellectuals, the 5 intellectuals sitting here, left the national politics and bigger politics to the other gender. As if this politics at national level, there were comments here and there, but in your structure you did not build the bigger questions that any country or world is facing as far as political scenario is concerned today. And I'm very worried, because if you keep on leaving that space to my gender, then probably these small problems of my body being left out of the bigger plans will continue. I took up a workshop in Gujarat and spoke about fascism to women. And there were questions, discussions, etc., etc. It went on for a very long time. But at the end of it, a lady said to me, पर मोदी बहुत स्मार्ट है, बहुत खूबसूरत है. Now, there's a lesson there that the women in Gujarat largely are highly communalized as anybody else. Women are being fed the same kind of poison which men are being fed. And when you see that they are helping the men to burn the houses next door, then our intellectual, especially people like you, great minds, should get worried about it. That what are these processes that will lead to a society where women start participating in consolidation of fascism?
Just one more question and then
Hi, thank you everyone for touching upon a range of topics. So I work for a planning think tank called WRI, and we do a lot of consultations with governments. And every time there is any discussion around improving public spaces or improving safety for women in transport, it generally revolves around 2 things. One is lighting infrastructure, and the other is panic buttons in vehicles. Like, from the range of experiences you guys have, are there other ways to bring in interventions that can improve safety in while during mobility?
Okay. All right. So now we have for the whole panel to respond to all of the issues that have been raised.
I will begin by responding to Mr. Raza's comment that this was not a panel of us to have to talk about our politics, otherwise we would have spoken about it. And secondly, I would speak for all of us over here, and that is what I meant by transgressive spaces, that in the kinds of work we are doing, we are very acutely and astutely aware of the broader, larger political narratives, in the causes we are taking, in the knowledge production practices we are assuming, we are undertaking, we are challenging. We are very political. We are responding to that. So and also that so that's my comment. And also, like, there was this comment, and I'm going to bring in, what's the next best thing with politics? Cricket. So when the women's Indian cricket team was doing really well, there was this whole thing about oh, you know, their fees being raised and advertisement and all of those things. There was this whole discussion that women cricket team, unko mat do paisa. Let them, because we have to maintain the sanctity of the game. Why not? Why not give them the equality of the things? So that is what I'm saying, that the negotiations, like, to say ki, you know, this sort of assumption that if you are a woman, you have to take a sort of anti-communal stance, anti-violence stance, is in itself a problematic one. It also responds to a sort of certain kind of construction and imagination of the woman. And just to sort of quickly respond, that you know, we are talking a lot about safety and planning and all of those things. From my experiences of working with women on the margins in the jhuggies, what I have been interested in is the risks they are ready to take. And I think we have to flip the question of safety, and thus the problematizing planning. By, you know, when you spoke about, Amita, you spoke about commuting, तो झुग्गियों में से जब लड़कियों से बात करती हूँ, कहती है दीदी गुड़गांव में नौकरी चाहिए, जितना दूर हो घर से. You know, the commuting itself becomes a space of unveiling. The risks they are ready to take. को वो नहीं करना है, जीन्स पहन के जाओगे तो ऐसा होगा, हम तो पहन के जाएंगे, हम देखते हैं. And you know, so we have to really pay attention to these spaces. And just one last thing, and so I box, and I used to sort of follow around these groups of, not like the posh boxing clubs, but these like suburban boxing things in basements. और वहाँ पे लड़कियाँ भी आती थीं, लड़के भी आते थे. तो ये जो बॉक्सिंग फाइट्स होती हैं या जो वो होते हैं, इनके पास जगह नहीं होती है. तो वो कहाँ करते हैं? ये करते हैं मंदिरों में. And these are like these grand temples with all the घंटास and आरतीज happening. और पीछे उनके पास स्पेस होता है, so they rent it out for these competitions. And that moment, उसके बारे में, you know, what registers are there, क्या हो रहा है क्या नहीं, the presence. So बाहर वो चल रहा है साधु संत चोगा शोगा, और पीछे there are these women in shorts boxing away. The presence of that act, you know, makes the mandir compel its position. So I think these are the moments we really need to sort of respond to, think about. Yeah.
I think I'll broadly respond to Anand's question, and I think someone here as well, on the role of urban planning in affecting social change or taking on power structures and related. I think even Sabha mentioned it to some point as well. I think, let's be clear that, I mean, no one thing is going to make our cities gender equitable. I think we just need to be aware, and at least in my mind, I think that it will be a range of things from urban planning and design, criminal justice system, and behavioral social change together that will perhaps create gender equal cities. But let me give you some examples. Anand, you mentioned mobility, right? I think that there is also something which is a gendered concept, which is known as forced mobility, which means that the location of services, like you mentioned, makes women and girls take risky trips. So for example, location of absence of individual toilet facilities within bastis. And so here, so there is this aspect that we also need to consider, and so in the late 90s, there was a Parivartan scheme which was which was implemented in Ahmedabad along with Mahila Housing Trust and the corporation, where they actually upgraded the basti along with providing individual water and toilet facilities, right? And so I think that when we are actually talking about change can happen on a daily basis, and I think that is something that we can work towards. Another example, I think this is what Toronto has done. Bombay tried it at some point, but I think nobody knew it. I think you said that, you know, you spoke to these women and they said, well, you know, there are no services in the night, you know, or the access to the public transport stop is unsafe. Toronto actually introduced services known as request a stop, or hailer service, which meant after 9 p.m. you would be dropped as close to your destination as you could. And I feel like these small measures can, for example, what if it changed my mind saying, oh wait, I will get dropped as close to my house, maybe I will take a bus today, right? And rather than ask, say, either my parent or someone to come and pick me up. And so I think that we need to look at these as steps towards, enabling women's mobility. I'll give you one more example, and this is from Santiago in Chile, what they did. And this is one example, and I hope that we will find more in India. So according to the census, only 4% of trips to work in urban areas, 4% of cycling trips are by women. Okay? The rest are by men. Now, this is in India. What the city of, and I'm just going to use this, what the city of Santiago did over a period of about 2007 to 12 is it made a cycling plan for the city. It quadrupled the number of cycling tracks, which made it safer for everyone to cycle, right? What also happened is there were groups like Makaleta who not only taught women how to ride a cycle, because these are very real challenges, right? We may not know how to cycle, but also created cycling groups so that women could cycle together until they felt more confident. What they have found in terms of results is that they found that the number of women cyclists have increased from 10% to 30% of all cyclists, right? And I think that there is therefore an opportunity, and there are some examples, to kind of give over here as well. So just to kind of make that point about incremental change over a much larger time. I think someone spoke about resources. We at ITDP very recently released a policy brief on women and transport in Indian cities precisely to fill this gap, because we only think to fill this gap within government and saying what is it that cities can do to create not only a safer but also comfortable and convenient urban transport for women. So it's also available online. We're happy to share it with, if you like it as well.
Yeah, I think I'll respond to this creation of equitable cities and having spaces where you're able to engage with each other, and I think that is really important, because as soon as we have ghettos, I think ghettos make women's life far more precarious than a city which would have us living together. So anyways, I think that women are not really able to enjoy the city as much as men because of so many reasons. And when there's a ghetto, the kind of surveillance and the kind of conformity to your religion and to those dictates becomes even higher. So I think that also I'm taking from what Amita has said, and this meaning when we're talking political power, I think that let's talk planning. Planning is also consolidation of power. Who does the city get planned for and by who? And now I think that we are getting to speak about engendering cities. We are talking about making them more women friendly, but I feel that we need to get beyond that now. It's not just women. Women have many identities, and certain identities in these cities are not able to breathe, live, or even travel, because so a commute in the train for a Muslim woman from Mumra wearing a burqa is so much worse than for another woman. Meaning you see that there's a fourth seat available, but it will not be offered to her simply because she's a Muslim woman. So how are the cities also engaging with diverse identities, and how can we change that? I think that is important. Now, if one says about pedagogy and how one can influence planning, the Sachar committee report had come up with this recommendation of a diversity index. Now, how can we use that diversity index to inform the kind of planning that we are doing, and will it be possible to use that? I think it's a very well thought out plan already. And so how do we use that? Meaning, I think that when we were working with the Bombay Development Plan, we felt that we were successful substantially in pushing for a lot of demands, including the gender demands that we made. But when it came to making it equitable for every community to be able to live together, to try to break down ghettos and try to think of what DCRs can we bring in so that you will ensure that people are interacting, are seeing each other, because unless you're visible, you do not exist, right? So how do we, so like we're trying to bring women in the public space, I think there are many other communities which are also feeling very criminalized, and just their presence in the public space arouses a lot of suspicion and fear, and hence then that engagement with the city is marred by that experience of how, because of not just the body I inhabit, but also what I wear to cover that body, right? So meaning I think those are discussions that we need to start having within our circles when we are doing various kinds of planning exercises. So yeah, I think also that, and so not just women, but the new term being intersectionality, not really new, but still I think that if we can think of it more critically and use that to inform the kind of work that we are doing, I think would be useful.
I think a lot of the things have been addressed, and I would just add a bit on what Mr. Raza raised the concern. I would rather beg to differ a bit. When I say the issues of women's body and women's sexuality, they, for a family, for an individual, or a community or a nation, cannot be seen as small, personal, frivolous issues, because my politics starts with my body. I want space to, in the public space, to scratch myself, scratch if I feel, that my breasts are, irritable. I need that space. But I may as well do it. But there are so many people around that who may not allow me to do it. I want to feed my baby. I don't want to wear a dupatta today. My politics starts there. Then my politics goes into my house to negotiate between my productive and reproductive roles in the house. Whether to travel on certain day to the office to take a work from home or not, or to travel outstation on a certain day, or not travel and give a reason in my office which is connected to my reproductive role, to be actually a genuine claimant for excuse from not traveling outside. So my politics starts there, and it starts with my body. So I feel women are negotiating in the personal spaces, in public spaces, in political spaces, and the politics on the issue of, be it participation in electoral politics, I think those issues, if they are not informed by what politics of women or different, sexualities, people with different sexualities and sexual orientations are, I think, it will be like one major gap which we would fail to address. So politics in every pocket are feeding into the larger politics of what men and women are doing. And the idea of when we say that, why a certain group of men are successful in mobilizing a group of women in a violent mob, violent political mob. I would just say that co-option into the larger, again, a very, very patriarchal mindset of what pitches people with more power against people with less power. That mindset actually doesn't discriminate between whether I have a vagina or whether you have a penis or whether you have a different kind of genitals. That mindset prevails because ultimately we are ghettoizing individualities and certain identities. So I think it's a collective fight. We cannot segregate electoral politics or the politics in the personal space or a workspace. I would just say that.
So I'm just tempted to add my voice to what she said just now. And I think which is very important because I don't think a larger strategic politics can be divorced of the everyday politics and personal politics at all. Okay. In fact, I think if one therefore looks at across ideologies, across nation states, across cities per se produced by different politico-economic regimes, you still see highly gendered, highly unequal cities which are being created, where women are being used in many different ways, sometimes as workers, sometimes asked to kind of stay back and take care of household work. So sometimes a husband may be a fascist, sometimes you have a political party which is a fascist, sometimes you have a bureaucracy which is a fascist. So you just go through a series of encounters, and within which women do get used, but they do get used by an entire system. So the way I would see as moving forward is how does one make decision making, how does one make politics much more accessible to women. And when I say accessible to women, I would here also see that it's not just not being accessible to women, then it is also accessible to the men, to the youth, to everyone in society, and therefore creating forums which are much more locality level forums and building from there a model of a city which is much more accessible. That's it.
Thank you so much. I really don't have anything more to add. I was trying to see if I can say anything more because I was partly trying to also respond to Gauhar Saab's provocation. I just want to say one thing. To me, the experience of women or any other identity in its material concrete detail is part of the material base on which society is constructed, right? If we take that as the materiality, then are there ways in which we can construct historical materialism in other dimensions? And I think that it's very important for us to explore that possibility, take all of the things that have been said as pieces of that, and ask ourselves, do we have elements of some way of taking on fascism from all the different things that have been said as experiences coming from very concrete circumstances in a particular location at a particular point of time. And I think that's the reason why I really wanted to have this conversation, and I'm really excited and very, very happy. Thank you so much.